6 students mock disabled girl. But her sergeant brother arrives and shocks everyone. Emily Parker felt her heart tighten every time she needed to enter the cafeteria at St. Paul's Academy. The cruel laughter always came her way, accompanied by exaggerated gestures that mimicked her way of communicating. She lowered her head and moved forward, pretending not to notice. That Thursday in March, the situation was even worse. Tyler Johnson, the class leader, had gathered his 5 friends around the table where she tried to eat lunch in peace. Mason pointed his cell phone toward her, recording everything, while Ethan made exaggerated hand gestures. The girls in the group, Madison and Olivia, laughed loudly, and Jacob Anderson imitated exaggerated facial expressions. "Look, everyone!" shouted Tyler, loud enough for the entire cafeteria to hear. "Emily is trying to tell us something." The 6 young people wore the impeccable blue uniform of the most traditional private school in Riverside Heights. Their families were well known in the city, children of business owners and successful professionals. But at that moment, all the privileged education they had received seemed to have disappeared. Emily kept her eyes fixed on her plate of food, trying to finish quickly to get out of there. Silent tears began to stream down her face. She wore a light green blouse that contrasted with the hostile environment around her. "Dude, stop it," murmured Andrew, a student watching from afar. But his voice was too low, drowned out by the noise of the laughter. "Let's make a video for the school channel," suggested Madison, grabbing her own cell phone. "Emily can be our deaf star." The word deaf echoed through the cafeteria like a slap. Some students stopped eating and looked at the scene with discomfort, but no one dared to intervene. The popularity of Tyler's group was too intimidating. Emily felt the world around her dissolve. The cafeteria walls seemed to close in on her. She tried to get up, but Tyler blocked her way. "Hold on, Emily. We haven't finished our conversation yet," he said, making theatrical gestures with his hands. Or rather, our non-conversation. It was at that moment that the double doors of the cafeteria swung open with a force that made all the students turn their heads. The sudden noise cut through the laughter like a blade. Sergeant David Parker entered the room with firm, determined steps. His impeccable military uniform contrasted with the chaos of teenagers around the tables. The medals on his chest shone under the fluorescent light, and his upright posture commanded instant respect. Silence fell over the cafeteria like a heavy blanket. Tyler and his friends froze, their cell phones still in their hands, the smiles slowly fading from their faces. David was 45 years old with 25 years of military service. His graying hair at the temples and the wrinkles around his eyes told stories of responsibility and dedication. But at that moment, his expression was one of controlled anger that made even the boldest students step back. He walked slowly between the tables, his eyes fixed on the group surrounding his younger sister. Each step echoed in the absolute silence of the cafeteria. The kitchen staff stopped working to watch the scene. "Do you think this is funny?" His voice cut through the air like a military order. Tyler tried to play it off, quickly putting his cell phone in his pocket. "I don't know what you're talking about. We were just talking with Emily." David stopped a few meters from the group, his eyes scanning each young face with the precision of a soldier, assessing the battlefield. "Talking?" he repeated, his voice low but loaded with authority. "Do you know why my sister can't hear the cruel words you say about her?" The question took everyone by surprise. The 6 students looked at each other, confused. "She was born that way," murmured Olivia uncertainly. "No." David shook his head slowly. "Emily wasn't born with hearing loss." The impact of those words was immediate. Emily looked up, surprised to see her brother there. She hadn't expected him to know what was happening at school. David continued, his voice growing more intense. 5 years ago, Emily was just 12 years old when she saw a fire consuming a house here in the neighborhood. She heard the screams of a 6-year-old child trapped on the 2nd floor. The firefighters hadn't arrived yet. The sergeant paused, watching as the young people's faces began to change. "My sister didn't hesitate. She climbed through the flames to save that child. During the rescue, a beam fell near them. The blast permanently damaged her auditory system. Emily lost her hearing while saving a child's life." A heavy silence fell over the cafeteria. Some students watching from other tables moved closer, intrigued by the story. "But that's not all," David looked directly at Jacob Anderson, who was at the far right of the group. "The child she saved is here in this cafeteria." Jacob Anderson felt the blood drain from his face. His eyes widened as the memory began to form in his mind. "Do you remember, Jacob Anderson?" David continued. "You were 6 years old. Your parents weren't home. You were playing with matches in the bedroom when the fire started." The boy began to tremble. The fragmented memories of that terrible day came back like an avalanche, the smell of smoke, the fear, the screams, and then an older girl appearing at the window, reaching out her hand to him. "Emily," Jacob Anderson whispered, looking at the girl who now avoided his gaze. "She carried you in her arms down the stairs while the house collapsed around you," David explained. "When you got out, she could no longer hear. The price of your life was her hearing." Tears began to stream down Jacob Anderson's face. His friends looked at him in shock, not knowing how to react. Tyler tried to downplay the situation. "We didn't know about this, Sergeant. If we had known—" "If you had known what?" David interrupted him. "Would you treat her with respect? Would her suffering be more valid? Would her disability be more acceptable?" The question echoed through the cafeteria like a challenge. Tyler couldn't find an answer. It was then that Principal Margaret Wilson appeared, alerted by the commotion. She was a 50-year-old woman, always concerned with the institution's reputation. "Sergeant Parker, what's going on here?" she asked, trying to maintain a controlled tone. "I'm having an educational conversation with these young people, Principal," David replied, without taking his eyes off the group. "I'm sure it was just harmless teasing," Margaret tried to defend the students. "They're good boys from respectable families." David turned to the principal with an expression that made her take a step back. "Respectable families who raise children, who humiliate a girl who lost her hearing saving lives? What kind of values are those?" Emily, who had remained silent throughout the discussion, finally stood up. She looked at her brother and began to communicate in sign language. Her movements were quick and filled with emotion. David translated for everyone in the cafeteria. "She says this has been going on for months, that they film her, make jokes, exclude her from group work, that she eats alone every day because no one wants to sit with her." The translation hit those present like a slap. Some students from other tables lowered their heads, ashamed for having been bystanders too. Emily continued gesturing, and David went on. "She says that during oral presentations, they laugh when she tries to speak, that they imitate her voice and make strange sounds, that they post videos of her on social media with cruel captions." Madison, one of the girls in the group, finally spoke. We didn't think it was hurting that much." "Didn't think," David stepped closer to her. "Or didn't want to think." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, make sure to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us, who are just starting out, now continuing. It was then that Andrew, the boy who had murmured a weak protest before, approached the group. He was shyer than the others, not part of the popular circle. "I wanted to help," he confessed, looking at Emily. "Several times I wanted to come to you and offer help, but I was afraid of being excluded too. I was afraid of becoming a target." His honest confession created a crack in the group. Mason, who had recorded the videos, said, "Dude, this isn't right. We know it's not." "Shut up, Mason," Tyler cut him off. "You don't have the guts to own up to anything." "And do you?" Mason retorted. "You're the one who always leads these things?" Tension began to settle among the friends themselves. Ethan, who usually followed Tyler blindly, seemed to hesitate for the first time. "Maybe we should really stop," he murmured. "Stop?" Tyler looked at his friends with contempt. "You're going to let a military man intimidate us? Our families have influence in this city." David took a step forward, his presence becoming even more imposing. "Your family has influence. Let's see what kind of influence that is." At that moment, an elegant woman hurriedly entered the cafeteria. It was Victoria Johnson, Tyler's mother and one of the most influential businesswomen in Riverside Heights. She wore an expensive suit and carried a designer bag. "What's going on here?" she demanded to know, looking directly at David. "Who are you to intimidate my son?" "I'm the brother of the girl your son has been humiliating for months," David replied calmly. Victoria looked at Emily with disdain. I'm sure Tyler wouldn't do anything cruel. He's a well-mannered boy. Well-mannered? David pointed to Mason's phone. Want to see the videos they recorded of my sister? Victoria hesitated, but her arrogance prevented her from backing down. Those are teenage pranks. If the girl is too sensitive, maybe she should study somewhere else. Victoria's cruel comment made Emily lower her head even further. David felt anger boiling inside him, but he kept control. Mrs. Johnson, he said, his voice dangerously calm. The girl you speak of so coldly is the same one who saved your mother during the pandemic. Victoria stopped mid-sentence. What? Mrs. Catherine, your 78-year-old mother. When she had pneumonia and the hospitals were full, who do you think took care of her? Who did the shopping, brought the medicine, cleaned the house? Victoria's face began to lose color. Emily spent every afternoon at your mother's house, taking care of her as if she were family. Mrs. Catherine always said that this girl was an angel, the same girl your son humiliates every day. The revelation hit Victoria like a punch in the stomach. She remembered her mother's stories about the sweet girl who didn't speak much, but had a huge heart. That can't be true, she stammered. At that moment, Mrs. Susan, the school cleaning staff member, approached the group. It is true, Mrs. Johnson, she confirmed. Emily always helps everyone here. When my grandson was struggling with math, it was she who stayed after school helping him, even with all the communication difficulties. Other staff members began to speak up, telling stories about Emily's kindness, how she helped organize the library books, how she comforted sad classmates, how she always offered her food to those who forgot their snacks. With each revelation, Tyler's group seemed to shrink more. Olivia began to cry, realizing the magnitude of what they had done. I remember now, whispered Ethan. When I broke my arm during recess, she was the first to help me. She stayed with me until the ambulance arrived. And when I got sick during the physical education test, added Madison. She took me to the nurse's office and stayed with me until I felt better. Each positive memory about Emily contrasted cruelly with the months of bullying she had suffered at their hands. Tyler, realizing he was losing control of the situation, tried one last defense. Okay, she might be a good person, but that doesn't change the fact that she's different. People like her should stick with people like them. Tyler's prejudiced remark made even his own friends step back. Mason shook his head in disapproval. Dude, now you've crossed the line, murmured Mason. David approached Tyler, his imposing height making the boy feel small. People like her? Repeated David slowly. Do you mean brave people? Kind people? People who sacrifice something of themselves to help others? I didn't mean that, Tyler tried to explain, but it was too late. Then tell me, Tyler, David continued. What have you sacrificed to help someone? When was the last time you thought about anyone other than yourself? The question echoed in the silence of the cafeteria. Tyler couldn't find an answer. David then addressed the whole group. I'm going to propose something to you. An experiment that might open your eyes to what you've done. What kind of experiment? Asked Principal Margaret, concerned. For 1 week, these 6 young people will communicate only through sign language. They will experience the isolation they imposed on my sister. That's ridiculous, protested Victoria. You can't force my son to do that. Actually, I can. David smiled for the first time since he had arrived. As a war veteran and rehabilitation specialist, I am authorized to propose non-punitive educational measures in bullying cases. He took an official document from his uniform pocket. The school can choose, accept my proposal for educational rehabilitation, or I can file a formal complaint with the district attorney's office for institutional negligence regarding systematic bullying. Principal Margaret paled. A formal lawsuit would be devastating for the school's reputation. Sergeant, let's discuss this calmly, she tried to negotiate. There's no negotiation, David was firm. Either they agree to learn empathy through the educational way, or they learn it through the legal way. At that moment, more parents began to arrive, alerted by messages from other students. Mason's father, Dr. Robert Smith, a respected doctor in the city, was the first to speak up. If my son was involved in this, he will accept the consequences. Sergeant, what you're proposing seems fair to me. Ethan's mother, a university professor, also supported. Ethan was always raised to respect differences. If he forgot those lessons, it's time to relearn them. One by one, the parents arrived and became aware of the situation. The pressure on Tyler and Victoria increased. Jacob Anderson, who had remained silent since discovering that Emily had saved him, finally approached her. With tears in his eyes, he began to gesture awkwardly, trying to form the words, "Thank you," in sign language. Emily looked at him in surprise. It was the first time in months that someone from the popular group had tried to communicate with her respectfully. "I accept," Jacob Anderson said aloud. "I accept participating in the experiment. It's the least I can do for you, Emily." His statement created a domino effect. Mason was next. "I accept too. We messed with you when we should have protected you." Ethan, Madison, and Olivia also accepted one by one. Tyler was isolated, being pressured from all sides. "Tyler," his mother Victoria finally spoke, her voice softer than before. "Maybe it's time you learned some lessons I couldn't teach you." Victoria's admission of failure surprised everyone, including Tyler. He looked around, seeing he was completely alone in his resistance. "All right," he murmured finally. "I accept." David nodded, satisfied. "The experiment starts tomorrow. You'll have basic sign language lessons with an instructor I'll arrange. For 1 week at school, you can only communicate this way." "What if we break the rule?" asked Madison. "Community service in the municipal hospital's hearing-impaired wing," David answered without hesitation. The seriousness of the proposal made everyone understand this wasn't a joke. Emily, who had followed the entire discussion, finally stood up and gestured something to her brother. "She wants to know if she can help teach you," David translated. "My sister is offering help to people who mistreated her months ago." Emily's generosity left everyone silent. Olivia started crying again, this time from shame and regret. "Why would you do this?" Olivia asked Emily directly, even knowing she couldn't hear. Emily read her lips and gestured a response that David translated. "She says because you're young and can learn, that she'd rather have friends than enemies." Emily's simple, hopeful answer touched even the hardest hearts present in the cafeteria. David looked at the group one last time. "The experiment starts tomorrow at 7 a.m. Don't be late," he signaled to Emily, and the two left the cafeteria together, leaving behind a group of teenagers forever transformed by that encounter. The next morning, the 6 students arrived at school with a mixture of anxiety and curiosity. David waited for them in the meeting room with an older man with white hair. "This is Professor Anthony Fletcher, deaf since birth and a sign language specialist," David introduced. "He'll be your instructor." Professor Anthony smiled and began gesturing while David translated. "He says he's happy to meet you and that the first lesson is learning that communication doesn't depend only on voice." During the first 2 hours, the young people struggled to form the most basic words. Their clumsy fingers and lack of coordination frustrated simple attempts to say hi or thank you. Tyler, accustomed to being the leader, grew quickly frustrated with his inability to express himself. "This is impossible!" he shouted, breaking the rule for the first time. David noted the infraction on a clipboard. "First rule break. 2 hours of community service at the hospital." The immediate punishment made Tyler understand there would be no tolerance for slip-ups. During break, the 6 met in the cafeteria, trying to communicate only through gestures. Frustration was visible on every face. Emily approached their table, carrying some sheets of paper. She had drawn basic signs and written simple explanations to help them. Jacob Anderson was the first to try using the drawings. He managed to form "thank you" hesitantly, and Emily smiled, encouraging him. The interaction attracted other students who stopped to watch. Some laughed at the popular kid's difficulty, but others grew curious about sign language. By the end of the first day, everyone was mentally exhausted. The simple task of asking for water in the cafeteria had become a monumental challenge. "Now you're starting to understand," David said, when they gathered to evaluate the day. "Imagine this being permanent. Imagine not being able to easily express yourself with friends, teachers, family." Madison, who had spent the whole day frantically gesturing whenever she wanted to speak, finally understood. It's like you have something important to say, but no one understands. Exactly, David confirmed. And now imagine that besides not understanding, people laughed at you or avoided you because of it. On the second day, something interesting began to happen. Mason discovered he had a natural knack for signs. His fingers seemed more coordinated than the others, and he could form more complex words. You have a talent for this, Emily gestured to him during lunch. Mason managed to understand the basic message and smiled, feeling useful for the first time during the experience. Ethan, on the other hand, was struggling immensely. His large, clumsy hands made disjointed signs that caused confusion. He isolated himself at a separate table, frustrated. Emily noticed his difficulty and approached. She gently took his hands and guided his fingers through the correct movements with infinite patience. Emily's kindness towards someone who had mistreated her moved Ethan deeply. Tears welled in his eyes as he finally managed to form the word, sorry. On the third day, an unexpected situation tested the group. During history class, Professor Mark asked a direct question to Tyler, who couldn't respond verbally. Is there a problem, Tyler? The teacher mocked. Lost your tongue? Tyler tried to gesture, but the teacher didn't understand and took it as disrespect. To the principal's office now, the teacher yelled. Emily quickly stood up and gestured to the teacher, trying to explain the situation. But Professor Mark didn't know sign language and grew even angrier. Both of you freaks to the principal's office, he shouted cruelly. The word freaks echoed through the room like thunder. The other students were shocked by the teacher's cruelty. Mason impulsively stood up. Hey, don't call her... But he stopped, remembering the rule. He couldn't speak. Frustrated, he gestured frantically, trying to defend Emily. The scene turned into chaos, with several students gesturing and the teacher shouting orders that no one was following verbally. That's when Olivia had an idea. She grabbed paper and a pen and wrote in large letters, "They are doing an educational experiment about inclusion." The teacher read the paper, and his expression completely changed. He realized he had just demonstrated exactly the kind of prejudice the experiment was trying to combat. I didn't know, he murmured, clearly ashamed. The incident spread quickly through the school. Some teachers began showing interest in learning basic signs. Other students volunteered to participate in optional classes. But there was also resistance. A group of conservative parents organized to question the radical experiment happening at the school. On Thursday, during a parent meeting, Victoria Johnson found herself in an odd position. She was defending the experiment she had initially attacked. I've seen real changes in my son, she told the group of unhappy parents. Tyler is more empathetic, more aware of others' difficulties. Jacob Anderson's father, an influential lawyer, also supported it. This experiment is teaching values that we, as parents, have failed to pass on. Our children are learning compassion in practice. But not everyone agreed. Some parents argued that the school should focus on the academic curriculum, not on social experiments. The tension at the meeting grew until Mrs. Catherine, Victoria's mother and Tyler's grandmother, asked to speak. At 78 years old, she rarely appeared at school events, but had made a point to be present. You want to know what I think about this girl who can't hear, she began, her voice weak but firm. She saved my life during the pandemic. When I was sick and given up for dead, when even my own daughter was afraid to come near me, this girl showed up at my door every day. The room fell into absolute silence. She cleaned my house, cooked my meals, organized my medications, all without being able to hear my thanks. She read my lips and responded with smiles. This girl has more humanity in her pinky finger than you have in your entire bodies. Mrs. Catherine looked directly at the parents, questioning the experiment. If you think teaching your children to have this girl's heart is a waste of time, then you've already lost your children to the cruelty of the world. Her words cut through the air like unquestionable truths. Several parents lowered their heads, ashamed. The meeting ended with approval to continue the experiment, but the division in the school community was clear. On the fifth day, something unexpected happened. During recess, a group of elementary school students approached the 6 young people doing the experiment. "Can you teach us too?" asked a 9-year-old girl. "I want to talk to Emily." The simple question deeply touched the 6. They realized their experiment was inspiring others to learn inclusion. Mason, who had become the most skilled in the group at signing, began teaching the basics to the younger children. Tyler, surprisingly, showed patience with a girl who had motor difficulties. Emily watched everything from afar with tears in her eyes. For the first time in months, she felt truly included in the school community. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now, continuing. On the 6th day, the eve of the experiment's end, the final test took place. The school organized a presentation where each group had to explain a project only in sign language, with Emily serving as the official translator. The 6 young people chose to present on inclusion and non-verbal communication. They had spent nights researching, creating posters, and rehearsing signs. At the time of the presentation, the anxiety was palpable. Tyler, who had always been eloquent, was nervous about having to express himself without words. When it was his turn to talk about communication barriers, he froze. His hands trembled and he forgot the signs. The silence stretched as the whole school watched. That's when Emily rose from the audience and walked onto the stage. She took Tyler's hands and helped him form the signs, giving him the courage to continue. The image of the two on stage, Tyler being helped by the girl he had mistreated, moved the entire school. Some teachers began to cry. The presentation was a success, but the most impactful moment was yet to come. On the 7th and final day of the experiment, David appeared at the school with a surprise. He had invited the entire local deaf community to a special assembly. Now you will meet people who permanently live the experience you had for just 1 week, he announced. 10 deaf adults of various ages arrived at the school. There was an engineer, a university professor, an artist, a doctor, among other successful professionals. Do you think we're pitiful? Asked Dr. Robert, the deaf engineer, using signs that David translated. Do you think our lives are a tragedy? The direct question provoked deep reflections in the young people. Dr. Fiona, the deaf doctor, told how she operated on patients and saved lives, communicating effectively with her team through signs and technology. The artist Paul showed his works that expressed the beauty of the visual world, art created by someone who had never heard music but understood rhythm through vibrations. Each story broke stereotypes and prejudices the young people didn't even know they had. Disability isn't in us, signaled Professor Anna. Disability is in the society that doesn't adapt to include us. Her words echoed deeply in the minds of the 6 students. At the end of the presentation, Emily went up on stage again. This time she would speak. David had brought a professional interpreter to translate her words in real time. I want to thank you 6, she began, her hands moving with grace and precision. Not for what you did to me before, but for the courage to change. Her voice through the interpreter was soft but filled with emotion. For months I felt alone in this school. I questioned if there was something wrong with me, if I deserved to be treated as a stranger. Tears began to stream down the faces of Tyler, Madison, Mason, Ethan, Olivia, and Jacob Anderson. But this week you showed me that people can change. That prejudice can be replaced by understanding. That cruelty can be transformed into kindness. Emily looked directly at Jacob Anderson. 5 years ago, I saved a child from the fire. Today, that child saved me from loneliness. The reference to the rescue and Jacob Anderson's transformation into her first ally made the whole school applaud in sign language, waving their hands in the air. I forgive all of you, Emily continued. Not because what you did was right, but because today you are different people. Her declaration of forgiveness was the most moving moment of the assembly. Tyler stood up and walked to the stage. With the sign techniques he had learned, he formed a response. We don't deserve your forgiveness, but we will work every day to earn it. Tyler's public commitment marked the official end of the experiment, but the beginning of a much greater transformation. In the days following the experiment, profound changes began to happen at the school. The 6 young people didn't return to their old behaviors. Instead, they became active advocates for inclusion. Mason discovered his passion for sign language and began giving free lessons to other students during breaks. His natural ease with the language made him consider a career as an interpreter. Ethan, who had struggled so much to learn the signs, developed a special empathy for children with learning difficulties. He began helping younger students with their homework. Madison and Olivia created a blog about inclusion, sharing inspiring stories of people with different types of disabilities. The blog quickly gained followers throughout the city. Jacob Anderson, moved by guilt and gratitude, became the closest to Emily. They developed a genuine friendship, studying together and creating an unbeatable duo in school projects. But it was Tyler who underwent the most dramatic transformation. The boy who had led the bullying now led inclusion initiatives. He proposed to the school administration the creation of a permanent accessibility program. Tyler's proposal included sign interpreters for school events, adapted teaching materials, and regular awareness campaigns about different types of disabilities. Principal Margaret, impressed with the students' change, approved all proposals and sought funding to implement them. Victoria Johnson, who had initially resisted the experiment, became one of its biggest supporters. She used her business influence to secure donations and sponsorships for the inclusion program. My son taught me more about humanity in these 2 weeks than I taught him in 17 years, she admitted to David during a planning meeting. Professor Anthony, the deaf instructor who had taught the young people, was hired as a permanent consultant for the school. His presence ensured that inclusion wasn't just a temporary project, but a lasting cultural change. Emily, who for months had felt isolated, was now at the center of a strong network of friends. She helped other struggling students, organized inclusive events, and became a natural leader at the school. But not everything was easy. Some students at the school still resisted the changes, forming a group that called the Six Traitors for having switched sides. One day during recess, a group of older boys surrounded Emily and her new friends, trying to intimidate them. "Look at this," said the group's leader, a boy named Victor, "the deaf gang." Tyler, who months earlier might have laughed at the provocation, now stood in front of Emily. "If you have a problem with her, you have a problem with me," he said firmly. "What's this, Tyler?" Victor laughed. "You're a protector of the disabled now." "I've become a better person," Tyler replied. "You should try it too." Tyler's calm but firm response disarmed the provocation. Victor and his friends walked away, muttering insults, but without the courage to confront a united group. The incident showed how the school's social dynamics had changed. The Six were no longer just former bullies in recovery, but true leaders of a new school culture. 3 months after the experience, the school organized its first Inclusion Week. The event included lectures, workshops, artistic presentations, and interactive activities about different types of disabilities. Emily was invited to give the opening lecture. For the first time, she would speak about her experience to the entire school. In the packed auditorium, with interpreters strategically positioned, Emily told her story. She spoke about the fire that changed her life, about the months of loneliness at school, about the transformative experience with the 6 classmates. "Inclusion isn't about pitying people who are different," she signed, as the interpreter translated. "It's about recognizing that our differences make us unique, not inferior." Her speech was interrupted several times by enthusiastic applause. Students, teachers, and parents were genuinely moved by her courage and wisdom. At the end of the lecture, Emily made a special invitation. "I'd like to call to the stage 6 people who changed not only their own lives, but our entire school." Tyler, Mason, Ethan, Madison, Olivia, and Jacob Anderson came up on stage, each wearing a T-shirt with one word: respect, inclusion, empathy, friendship, courage, and transformation. Together they formed the words "Thank you, Emily" in sign language, and the whole school joined them, creating a magical moment of unity. Inclusion Week was such a success that schools from other cities requested guidance to implement similar programs. Emily and the 6 young people were invited to share their experience at other schools. During one of these visits, at a school in the neighboring town of Oakwood, they encountered a situation similar to what had happened months before. A girl with cerebral palsy was being isolated by her classmates. Tyler approached the girl and, using sign language adapted to her condition, managed to communicate with her. The scene deeply touched the students at the visited school. 6 months ago, I was the problem, Tyler confessed to the students. Today, I know that the problem was never the different people. The problem was us, who didn't know how to see the beauty of diversity. His words echoed throughout the school, planting seeds of change in new hearts. Back in Riverside Heights, the transformation continued to expand. The city administration created a municipal inclusion program based on the school's experience. David was invited to coordinate the project, working with different institutions to promote accessibility. Emily became the youth ambassador of the program, representing the city at state-level events about inclusion. Her story inspired public policies that benefited hundreds of people with disabilities in the region. The 6 youths were also recognized by the City Council with a congratulatory motion for their transformation and leadership. During the ceremony, each of them spoke about the lessons they had learned. "I learned that being popular means nothing if you're not a good person," said Madison. "I discovered that my voice can be used to defend those who have no voice," added Olivia. "I understood that true strength is protecting the vulnerable, not attacking," reflected Ethan. "I learned that intelligence without empathy is empty," said Mason. "I discovered that courage is admitting your mistakes and fighting to correct them," confessed Jacob Anderson. Tyler was the last to speak. "I learned that leading means lifting others up, not putting them down. That popular should mean loved and respected, not feared. And that the strongest person in this entire story has always been Emily, who taught us to turn pain into hope." Tyler's words perfectly summarized all of their journeys. 1 year after the initial experience, the school organized a special meeting to evaluate the results of the inclusion program. The numbers were impressive. Bullying cases had decreased by 89%. Participation of students with disabilities in school activities increased by 300%, and over 200 students had learned sign language basics. But beyond the numbers, the human changes were even more significant. The school had become a model of inclusion, with students of different abilities working together naturally. Emily, now in her senior year of high school, had become class president by unanimous vote. Her academic projects focused on assistive technology, and she had won several scholarships to renowned universities. The 6 youths also thrived academically and personally. Tyler had changed his career plan to psychology, inspired by the transformative experience. Mason decided to study sign language translation and interpretation. Ethan chose special education. Madison and Olivia opted for journalism with a focus on human rights, and Jacob Anderson decided to study engineering to develop accessibility technologies. During the high school graduation ceremony, Emily was chosen to deliver the class graduation speech. It was a historic moment, the first time a deaf student held this position at the school. With her brother David in the audience, proud and emotional, Emily stepped onto the stage where so many transformations had occurred. 2 years ago, I felt invisible in this school," she began, with the interpreter translating for the entire community present. "Today, I know I was never invisible. I was just surrounded by people who didn't know how to see." Her voice, through the interpreter, echoed through the silent auditorium. "This class taught me that growing up isn't just about gaining height or age. Growing up is learning to see beauty where we once saw difference. It's choosing kindness when it would be easier to choose cruelty." Emily looked directly at the 6 youths who had become her best friends. "You taught me that people can change, that mistakes can become rights, that bullies can become protectors, and that sometimes our greatest enemies can become our best friends." Tears streamed down the faces of everyone in the audience. The transformation of those youths had become an inspiring legend for the entire community. 5 years ago, I lost my hearing while saving a life," Emily continued. "Today, I realize I lost nothing. I gained a unique perspective on the world, true friends, and the ability to inspire change." She paused, looking at the entire graduating class. "We are the generation that will change the world, not through grand heroic gestures, but through small daily acts of kindness. Every time we choose to include rather than exclude, to understand rather than judge, to love rather than hate." Emily gestured her final words with a passion that transcended any communication barrier. May each of us leave this school knowing that our diversity is our strength, that our differences make us unique, not divided, and that together we can create a world where no one else needs to feel alone or invisible. The auditorium erupted in applause, but not the traditional kind. The entire audience applauded in sign language, waving their hands in the air in a visual display of approval that Emily could see and feel. Tyler stood up from the front row and began gesturing, "Thank you for saving us," followed by Mason, Ethan, Madison, Olivia, and Jacob Anderson. Soon the entire class was on their feet, signing different messages of gratitude and love. David in the audience couldn't hold back his tears. His sister had transformed from victim to leader, from excluded to inspiration. The girl he had protected was now protecting others. After the ceremony, during the celebration, something happened that perfectly symbolized the entire journey. A group of younger students approached Emily and the 6 youths. "Can you teach us sign language?" asked a 12-year-old girl. "We want to be ready to include everyone when we get to high school." The simple question revealed how the school's culture had fundamentally changed. New generations were growing up with values of inclusion from the start. Emily smiled and signed, "Of course," and immediately the 6 youths joined her to improvise a basic lesson right there in the school garden. The scene of the former bullies teaching inclusion to younger children under the guidance of the girl they had mistreated was a powerful image of redemption and hope. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing. 2 years after graduation, the story of Emily and the 6 youths continued to inspire changes. The school had become a national reference for inclusion, receiving visits from educators across the United States. David had been promoted to Regional Coordinator of Military Inclusion Programs, developing protocols for integrating soldiers with disabilities into the armed forces. Emily was in her 3rd year of biomedical engineering at MIT, conducting research on advanced cochlear implants. Her academic work focused on making assistive technology more accessible to low-income families. Tyler had graduated in psychology and was completing a residency in school psychology, specializing in bullying prevention. His master's thesis analyzed the impacts of experiential empathy programs in educational environments. Mason had become a certified sign language interpreter and worked both at the school and in local hospitals. He had also created a YouTube channel teaching basic signs, which accumulated millions of views. Ethan was studying special education and had developed innovative methods for teaching children with learning difficulties through non-verbal communication. His projects were being used in schools throughout the state. Madison and Olivia had graduated in journalism and created an NGO focused on inclusive communication. They produced educational materials about diversity and worked with companies to develop more inclusive advertising campaigns. Jacob Anderson was in his final year of mechanical engineering, specializing in assistive robotics. His senior project was a robotic arm that responded to sign language commands. During an alumni reunion, the 7 of them reunited at the school that had been the stage for their transformation. The current principal, Margaret's successor, welcomed them as heroes. "You have no idea of the impact you've made," she said. "This school now educates young people who are aware of the importance of inclusion. Our bullying statistics are the lowest in the state." They visited the cafeteria where everything had started 5 years earlier. The place now had a commemorative plaque, "Emily Parker Space, where differences are celebrated." "Do you regret anything?" Jacob Anderson asked Emily as they watched students with different abilities having lunch together harmoniously. Emily shook her head and gestured her response, which Mason translated. "She says if she could go back in time and choose not to save you from the fire to keep her hearing, she would save you 1,000 times over. Because this journey brought her here, surrounded by people she loves and making a difference in the world." Emily's words moved everyone, reaffirming that her hearing loss had not been a tragedy, but the beginning of a life mission. During that visit, they learned something extraordinary. The experience they had lived through had inspired a state law. The Emily Parker Protocol established mandatory guidelines for all public and private schools in the state to implement inclusion and anti-bullying programs. Our story became a law? Tyler asked, incredulous. Not just a law, the principal smiled. It became hope for thousands of children who now study in safer and more welcoming environments. The information left everyone in silence, processing the magnitude of the impact their actions had generated. 3 years later, Emily was defending her doctoral thesis on sustainable assistive technologies for low-income communities when she received a call that would change her trajectory once again. The Department of Education invited her to lead a national school inclusion program. At 26, she would become the youngest national coordinator of a government program. "Do you accept?" asked the secretary during the video conference with an interpreter. Emily looked out the window of her university laboratory, where she was developing low-cost hearing equipment. She thought of all the young people who could benefit from a national inclusion program. "I accept," she gestured, "but with one condition." "What is it?" "I want to assemble my team with people who truly understand transformation and second chances." A week later, Emily was meeting with Tyler, Mason, Ethan, Madison, Olivia, and Jacob Anderson in Washington, D.C., presenting her team proposal to the department. "Gentlemen secretaries," Tyler began the presentation, "we are not just inclusion specialists by academic training, we are specialists by life experience." Each presented their area of expertise and how it connected with the mission of the national program. The diversity of backgrounds and unity of purpose impressed the government managers. "Are you sure you want to work together again?" asked the secretary. "Sometimes friendships can complicate professional relationships." Emily gestured a response that Mason translated. "She says we are not just friends, we are a chosen family united by a greater mission, and that great transformations need teams that trust each other unconditionally." The program was unanimously approved. Emily's team, informally known as the Transformation 7, immediately began working on the national implementation of the Inclusion Protocol. During the first 2 years of the program, they visited over 500 schools across the United States. Each visit included lectures, workshops, and personalized follow-up to implement inclusion policies. At a school in rural Louisiana, they encountered a situation that deeply moved them. An indigenous child with visual impairment was being discriminated against not only for their disability, but also for their ethnic background. "It's as if Emily and I were one person," Ethan observed. "Two different forms of exclusion affecting the same child." They developed a special program that celebrated both indigenous culture and ability diversity. The school's transformation was so significant that it became a model for other indigenous communities. At a school in the northeastern backcountry, they encountered cultural resistance to the idea of inclusion. Some parents believed that children with disabilities brought bad luck to the classrooms. Madison and Olivia developed a communication strategy that respected local beliefs while gradually introducing inclusion concepts. They organized gatherings where families with disabilities shared stories of success and overcoming challenges. Jacob Anderson created adaptive technological devices using available local materials, proving that inclusion didn't depend solely on expensive resources. Each challenge they faced strengthened the team and refined their methods. They learned that inclusion wasn't a single concept, but a constant adaptation to the specific needs of each community. By the 5th year of the national program, the results were impressive. Bullying cases related to disability had decreased by 67% in participating schools. School dropout rates among students with disabilities fell by 45%. Over 10,000 teachers had been trained in inclusion techniques, but the most significant impact was qualitative. An entire generation of children was growing up with values of respect and inclusion naturally integrated into their worldviews. During a national event where Emily presented the program's results, a question from the audience surprised her. "Dr. Emily, do you think your hearing impairment was necessary for you to develop this passion for inclusion?" The question was complex and touched the heart of her personal journey. Emily thought carefully before responding. "My hearing impairment wasn't necessary to make me an empathetic person," she gestured, with Tyler translating, "but the exclusion I experienced because of it gave me a unique perspective on how society treats different people." She continued, I believe anyone can develop empathy and work toward inclusion, regardless of whether they have a disability or not. My 6 best friends are proof of that. They transformed from bullies into advocates through education and experience. So you don't consider yourself a victim who overcame adversity? The journalist asked. Emily smiled before answering. I consider myself a person who discovered my purpose through difficult experiences, but my greatest pride isn't having overcome my own exclusion. It's having helped others discover the beauty of inclusion. After 7 years working on the national program, Emily received an invitation that left her speechless. UNESCO invited her to lead a global educational inclusion program working with developing countries around the world. It's a unique opportunity to impact millions of lives, explained the UNESCO representative during the video conference. Emily looked at her 6 friends, who were accompanying her in the meeting. They had built something special in the United States, but the chance to expand globally was tempting. Can I bring my team? She asked. Of course, as long as they're willing to travel constantly and work in culturally challenging environments. The 7 exchanged glances. This was a decision that would completely change their lives. Tyler was the first to speak. Emily, our journey began in a school cafeteria here in rural New York City. If it can expand worldwide, helping children across all continents, how can we say no? One by one, everyone confirmed their willingness to accept the global challenge. 6 months later, they were in Geneva, planning program implementations in 15 initial countries. Emily had become, at 30, the youngest director in the history of a UNESCO educational program. During a meeting with representatives from different countries, Emily presented her work philosophy. Inclusion isn't a Western concept that should be imposed globally, she explained through simultaneous interpreters. It's a universal human value that must be adapted to local cultural realities. Her respectful and collaborative approach impressed delegates from countries with cultures very different from the American one. In the first year of the global program, they worked in countries like Bangladesh, Kenya, Guatemala, and the Philippines. Each location presented unique challenges, but also unique learning opportunities. In Bangladesh, they discovered that girls with disabilities faced double discrimination. Olivia and Madison developed specific strategies to empower these young women through education and technology. In Kenya, they encountered communities where deaf children were isolated due to local superstitions. Mason worked with religious and community leaders to change these perceptions through cultural education. In Guatemala, Jacob Anderson adapted his assistive technologies to function without constant electricity, using solar power and simple mechanics. Each visited country left deep marks on the team, expanding their perspectives on diversity and human resilience. After 3 years of global work, Emily was invited to speak at the United Nations General Assembly about the program's results. It was the ultimate recognition of her work. In the iconic UN Hall, before representatives from 193 countries, Emily delivered the most important speech of her life. Ladies and gentlemen representatives, she began, with interpreters translating into dozens of languages simultaneously. 15 years ago, I was a silenced teenager, not because of my disability, but because of the prejudice of a society that didn't know how to include me. Her voice, through the interpreters, echoed through the historic hall. Today, I represent a program that has already impacted the lives of more than 2 million children in 47 countries. But I'm not here to talk about numbers. I'm here to talk about hope. Emily gestured with the passion that had always characterized her. Every child excluded today because of their difference is lost potential for humanity. Every young person discriminated against because of their disability, color, origin, or any other characteristic is a solution to future problems that will never be discovered. She paused, looking at the delegates from different continents. Inclusion isn't charity, it isn't kindness. Inclusion is collective intelligence. It's recognizing that our diversity is our greatest strength as a human species. At the end of her speech, Emily made an emotional invitation. I invite every nation represented here to commit to truly inclusive education, not just because it's morally right, but because it's strategically intelligent for the future of our countries. The UN hall erupted in prolonged applause. Delegates from conflicting countries stood up together, united by the power of the inclusion message. After the speech, Emily was approached by dozens of government representatives wanting to implement the program in their countries. What had started as an experiment in an American school was becoming a global movement. That evening at a restaurant in New York, the 7 friends were celebrating the day's success. It was a surreal scene. Young Americans from the countryside of New York City, dining just blocks from the United Nations, planning global changes. "Do you remember when our biggest problem was passing the college entrance exam?" laughed Jacob Anderson. "I remember when my biggest problem was deciding which student I was going to humiliate at recess," said Tyler, his voice filled with reflection. Tyler's evolution never failed to impress the group. From a bullying leader to a global advocate for inclusion, his transformation symbolized the human capacity for radical change. "And now, Emily?" asked Ethan. "What's the next step?" Emily smiled and gestured a response that Mason translated. "She says the next step is to return to the United States and train the next generation of inclusion advocates, that it's time to multiply what we've learned." The decision to return to the United States surprised everyone, but it made sense. After 5 years of working globally, Emily felt it was time to train others to continue the international work while she focused on the sustainability of the movement. Back in the United States, Emily was welcomed as a national hero. Her story had become part of the American school curriculum, inspiring children across the country. She established the Emily Parker Institute, not related to politics but to educational inclusion, in Riverside Heights, in the same town where her journey had begun. The institute offered specialization courses in educational inclusion, development of assistive technologies, and training of young leaders in diversity. The 6 friends took on different areas of the institute. Tyler directed the educational psychology division, Mason coordinated the sign language programs, Ethan led special pedagogy, Madison and Olivia managed communication and advocacy, and Jacob Anderson developed technological innovations. 3 years after the Institute's creation, they received a special visit. David, now a retired general, brought with him a group of 30 young military personnel interested in working with inclusion in the armed forces. "My sister taught me that true military strength isn't in excluding those who are different, but in finding the right place for each unique talent," he explained to the group of soldiers. The partnership between the Institute and the armed forces resulted in innovative programs for the rehabilitation and inclusion of veterans with disabilities. One of the most emotional moments in the Institute's history happened during the graduation of the 5th class of inclusion specialists. Among the graduates was Victor, the same boy who had tried to intimidate Emily and her friends years earlier at school. "Why did you decide to study inclusion?" Emily asked him during the ceremony. Victor, now a 28-year-old man, answered sincerely, "Because you showed me that being on the wrong side of history is a choice, and I want to spend the rest of my life choosing the right side." His response symbolized how the impact of the Transformation 7's change had spread far beyond what they had imagined. On the 15th anniversary of the original experience in the school cafeteria, Emily decided to organize a special event. She invited hundreds of people whose lives had been touched by the inclusion journey that began that day. The event took place in the school gym where it all started, now expanded and modernized, but still bearing the plaque Emily Parker Space in the cafeteria. Among those present were students, teachers, parents, professionals trained by the Institute, government representatives, and even international delegates who had worked with the global program. During her keynote speech, Emily shared a profound reflection. 15 years ago, 6 young people surrounded me in this school with cruel intentions. Today, those same 6 are my chosen family and partners in a global mission of inclusion. She looked at each of the 6, who were in the front row. This transformation didn't happen because they were special people. It happened because someone believed they could change and gave them the opportunity to experience the world through a different perspective. Emily gestured her final words with an emotion that transcended any barrier. Every person in this room has the power to be someone's catalyst for transformation. Every act of kindness, every moment of empathy, Every choice to include rather than exclude can be the start of an extraordinary journey. The gymnasium fell silent for a few seconds before erupting in simultaneous applause, loud for those who could hear, visual for those who communicated through signs. During the reception after the event, a 12-year-old girl approached Emily. She wore hearing aids and seemed shy. "Dr. Emily," she whispered, "I also lost part of my hearing in an accident. The kids at my school sometimes make jokes. What should I do?" Emily knelt to be at the girl's level and gestured a caring response that an interpreter translated. "First, remember that you are not defined by your disability, but by your character and your dreams. Second, find an adult you trust to help you when situations get tough." The girl smiled, feeling understood and welcomed. "And third," Emily continued, "remember that some of the people who make jokes today might become your best friends tomorrow if someone teaches them to see you as the amazing person you are." The conversation with the girl reminded Emily of why she had chosen to dedicate her life to inclusion. It wasn't just about policies or programs, it was about making sure no child felt alone or invisible. At the end of the evening, when all the guests had left, Emily and her 6 friends found themselves alone in the school cafeteria. They sat at the same table where the transformation had begun 15 years earlier. "Do you think our story really changed the world?" asked Olivia, contemplative. Tyler, always the thinker of the group, answered, "I think our story proved that the world can be changed. One person, one school, one city at a time." "And what comes next?" Ethan wanted to know. "We've already impacted millions of lives, created laws, trained professionals, inspired global programs. What's the next chapter?" Emily looked out the cafeteria window where she could see children playing in the courtyard during the evening class for teens and adults. Some had visible disabilities, others didn't, but all were playing together naturally. She gestured a response that Mason translated. "The next chapter isn't ours to write. It's theirs." She pointed to the children. "Our role now is to ensure they grow up in a world where inclusion isn't an extraordinary achievement, but a normal reality." "So our mission is complete?" asked Jacob Anderson. "Our mission will never be complete." Emily gestured with a smile. "But our personal transformation, that is complete. We've become the people we needed when we were young." Madison, who for years had documented their journey through articles and videos, made a final observation. "You know what I find most amazing about our whole story? It's not that you stopped mistreating me, Emily. It's that you chose to forgive us and teach us to be better." "And do you know why?" Emily replied, looking at all of them. "Because I believed in you before you even believed in yourselves. And sometimes, believing in someone is all that person needs to transform." Emily's words echoed through the empty cafeteria, carrying the weight of wisdom earned through years of pain, growth, and dedication to a greater cause. That night, as they walked together to their cars in the school parking lot, the 7 friends knew their individual lives would continue, but they would always be connected by an experience that had transformed them from troubled youths and victims into a global force for change. Emily looked one last time at the school where her inclusion journey had begun. The lights were still on in the evening classrooms, where adults who hadn't had opportunities when they were young now pursued their educational dreams. She smiled, knowing each lit light represented a story of second chances, of overcoming, of transformation, and that her own story had helped create a world where more lights like these could shine. End of story. Now tell us, what did you think of these young people's transformation? Do you believe people can really change like Tyler and his friends? And Emily, do you think she made the right decision by forgiving those who hurt her? We really want to know your honest opinion about this story of overcoming and inclusion. Leave your comment, don't forget to like, and most importantly, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss other moving stories like this one. Your participation is essential for us to keep bringing content that touches the heart.